I'm very interested in what you're saying there because there have been a number of people running around saying that gold is in a bubble and all the rest of it. Now, I think these are probably people of not quite the same economic persuasion as you and I. What do you feel about gold in that sense? Do you think that there is an element of bubble in it, or do you think it is?
Well, as a trend forecaster, I'm always taken aback when people who didn't see it coming say what's going to happen next.
True. As a stockbroker, I can agree with you entirely on that one.
So you know what I'm speaking about. My first buy of gold was in 1978.
Right.
At $187.50 an ounce.
Yes. You remember it to the cent.
And I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
I was a young guy. I'll tell you how I became a trend forecaster. I mentioned I used to work in D.C.
Yeah.
And the Iranian conflict was heating up.
And that was 79, was it?
78, 79 it started happening, yeah. It started bubbling over in 78. And then on New Year's Day, I believe it was 79 or 80, one of those two, Jimmy Carter came back from spending New Year's Eve with the Shah and his wife, he and Rosalind. And in those days when the president went overseas, it was a big deal. Kind of like if George Bush had gone overseas before he was president.
Yes.
And he comes out of the helicopter and salutes and walks up to the microphones. And he announces to the American people that the Shah was the island of stability in the Middle East. And at that moment, I became a political atheist. I'd been around long enough. I knew what the game was.
Yes.
I'd been watching what was going on in Iran since I learned how to read about history, about how, what was it, Anglo-Iranian, now BP and Standard Oil.
That's right.
They were thrown out by Mossadegh in 1953, who was the democratically elected president of Iran by Kermit Roosevelt, a descendant of Theodore Roosevelt, who was with the CIA. And was it MI5? Is that the name of the little group over there?
No, it's MI6, which does the overseas stuff. Yes.
Okay. And they overthrew Mossadegh.
Yes.
And put in this brutal dictator. And I used to read about the Shah all the time, the Savak, the secret police.
Yeah.
And so when the revolution began to happen, I knew it was real. Well, when Carter came back and said what he said, and mentioning how current events form future trends, I said to myself, after I became angry at the lie, because I knew it was going to go over, I said, what will this mean? And I realized that gold and oil prices would go up.
Yes.
And that's when I really started heavily speculating in gold.
Well, and absolutely right. And fast forwarding today, of course, all the money that's being printed now, the paper money that is bound to lead to another acceleration in these prices, I feel, in 2012. I mean, have you any views on that?
Well, I do have a view on that. But why I don't see gold as a bubble? Because I remember trading back then. And I remember how difficult it was even to try to find somebody to do trading. Yeah. And if you remember back then, remember the silver market was controlled by the Hunt brothers?
I remember that well.
1979, 1980 society.
Yes.
There was no China.
No.
Everybody was still locked behind the Iron Curtain.
That's right.
East of what? Yugoslavia.
Well, it was east of this side of Berlin.
Berlin,
actually.
exactly. Yeah, east of Berlin. There was no global economy.
No, no.
This is a global game now. That's what makes it so different.
Yes.
And societies that have been around a while know the value of gold.
Yes, exactly.
And they know the devaluation of paper.
Yeah.
That's why I believe that regardless of what the central banks and the Fed try to do to regulate the supply of gold and the sale of gold or the price of gold, they will become, at one point, they will not be able to pull it off because it's a global marketplace now.
Absolutely.
And that's what changes the game, and that's why I don't think it's a bubble.
One of the things that's very interesting, you're mentioning it as a global marketplace is the Chinese in particular. Well, we know the Indians have always been buyers of gold. They buy gold jewelry and so on. It's all part of a bride's dowry and all the rest of it. But the Chinese government, having banned their citizens from buying gold for a long time, are now encouraging them to buy gold. Now, I'm just interested in your take on this, because it seems to me that there's a possibility that this policy is designed to screw things up for the Western banking system. It's hardly helpful, if you like, as far as the establishment over here and in Europe is concerned. Have you any views on that?
China's a tough one to call. They have a lot of problems. Not only the biggest problem is that when the West stops buying, they stop selling.
Yes.
And when the West stops buying and they stop selling, the Australians and the Brazilians and other natural resource providers from Chile, with all their copper and other minerals, stop exporting into China. And China has 1 billion people, 1.2 billion people, and 1 million problems. They have unrest continually, labor unrest, internal. Yes. And they're also sitting on how many trillion of U.S. dollars in their reserve? About 1 point something trillion?
Potentially worthless.
Potentially worthless. That's why I'm saying they're in a very difficult position. So yes, I would say that the Chinese people are buying gold, will continue to buy gold. I believe that most people around the world are going to be buying more gold.
Yes.
Particularly if I lived in Greece right now.
What else would you do?
What else would I want in my pocket?
Yes. Exactly.
And it's not going to stop in Greece.
No.
It's going. When you read the news and they talk about the bailout, let us remember, of course, that Greece is the tiny element in all of this euro problem.
It is. It's the runt of the litter. I mean, that's the only way to describe it.
And I believe that runt owes almost $500 billion, about $400 billion.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
So now, when they keep talking about, well, we're going to give them another 12 billion or 18 billion, that's only paying off the.
It's a nonsense.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the thing is escalating now very, very rapidly, because the problems that Italy and, I mean, not just Spain, I mean, we know the problems that Spain and Portugal and Ireland have had, but it's now spreading to Italy and France, and I think that the Euroland politicians must be getting absolutely terrified. What do? They
can't do anything, and that's what I'm saying.
They're powerless.
They're powerless.
Yes.
The only thing they know how to do is to print more money.
Yes.
And you were talking about
But they can't do that because the ECB has been set up to be beyond their reach.
But it's not, and that's what I was going to say. Look how they've already changed the rules.
They have indeed.
You weren't supposed to bail out a country.
Yeah.
The ECB, I remember hearing Trichet saying that they wouldn't be buying bonds.
Yes. And of course they have been buying bonds.
Yeah,
yes.
That's what's keeping it afloat.
So you would draw no distinction at all about buying bonds in the market, which are already issued and so on and so forth, and doing a quantitative easing type operation. You would draw no distinction at all.
Same game, different name.
And the key being to keep yields down so they can raise money at whoever might be stupid enough to buy their bonds at an interest rate which they can afford. And it's no more than that.
That to me.
Yeah.
And by the way, about inflation, more than inflation, because inflation also has to do with supply and demand.
Yes.
I see it more as a currency devaluation. So, for example, the price of coffee may stay stable in Zimbabwe, but you need a lot more of those Zimbabwean dollars to buy it.
Exactly.
And that's what's going on.
Yes.
And that's why gold is at the levels it's at now, particularly because of what's happened in the United States at the devaluation of the dollar.
Yeah.
The standard of living by every measurement has declined, and in some areas it's at third world status.
And coming back to the original point that you were making, it is quite clear under those circumstances that gold cannot be in a bubble.
No, I don't believe it is.